Now, I want to get to Dynamite because I thought Dynamite as a whole was maybe the best episode of the show there has been in very recent memory, certainly in the calendar year. It fixed so many of the holes from last week, and honestly, it made last week's show all the more frustrating when you kind of zoom out and you take a look at what happened on this show. Now, in the midst of everything going on, we have this Don Callis family versus Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega thing. It's still out there. And the show opens up with Don Callis revealing that there is, in fact, another member of the Don Callis family. And it happens to be somebody that Will Ospreay knows well. Surprise, surprise. It's Mark Davis, his former United Empire mate, former half of the Aussie Open tag team. So he and Ospreay get into it and they have a match. And again, it's like another one of those, to some extent, you're like, all right, it's another, not lackluster match, but it's like, do we need this right before Grand Slam? It's kind of how I've been feeling about some of the Brian Cage matches with both Ospreay and Omega. Like, I get that these guys need to be in action, but like, this didn't do a ton for me. But Ospreay gets into it with Don Callis after the match, and essentially brings out Kenny Omega, which sends Callis to the back. You get Ospreay and Omega both on the mic, and then after Kenny Omega gets done his promo, he does the adieu, good night, and goodbye bang, or good night bang, and then the promo goes, or the pyro goes off in the background. It's total. Like, he seems surprised, everybody seems surprised, whatever. It was kind of funny, but I don't know if we need a lot of funny with Kenny Omega. I still think that we're missing an opportunity here to present him as a star of stars, but whatever, that's what they're doing. And so fine, we're just going to deal with it. Eventually, Takeshita and Fletcher, they came out as part of this. They get held back by Don Callis. It's the whole thing. It's whatever. The Omega thing and Ospreay, I think, is ultimately going to work out. I think that ultimately that match at Grand Slam, even though nobody actually knows when we're going to get to see it, sometime after NBA All-Star Saturday, it's going to be a really good match. I hope that when this match is done, we get both Ospreay and Omega away from the Callis family. I want to see the Callis family succeed. Big Takeshita guy, big Fletcher guy. I think that in theory, Archer and Cage together as a tag team could be interesting fodder for the Hounds of Hell and for the Hurt Syndicate. But like, ultimately, they're not going to win anything. But like, they could still be imposing heels. Ultimately, that's kind of what you need. So speaking of the Hurt Syndicate, they came out, and MVP essentially gives props to Private Party and just mentions that they're essentially, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They lost their titles, and MVP issues a warning to the entire locker room that if you have a championship, the Hurt Syndicate is coming for that championship. They are coming for the gold. And then they also kind of open up that if anybody in the back has the balls enough to come out and take on Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin, have at it, fellas, because good luck. Who comes out? The Guns. Austin and Colton Gunn are back. And it was good to see them. And they still represent one of the best young tag teams in AEW. Now, their run as tag champs was iffy, and ultimately, after a back and forth on the mic, they get called the Ass Boys, and they embrace that. Are we going to see a reunion with their dad? Do we need that again? I don't know. But the Guns versus the Hurt Syndicate is set for next week. Tag team championship match. Will they win? Probably not. Will it be a good match? Sure will. Cool. We get a backstage promo with Mercedes Moné and Harley Cameron, but oh wait, it's Harley doing the ventriloquist routine. Great stuff. Mercedes comes out, kind of jeeringly, mockingly notes that Harley won her first match, but you don't get to ride the money train if you're still a loser, which she is, and then she goes back into her locker room. Harley Cameron flips her off. Harley Cameron, as I said last week, continues to deserve TV time. The ventriloquist thing with the Mercedes Moné puppet is hilarious, and I am here for it. We eventually get back to a weird interaction that sort of plays out a little bit later on, but Hangman Page backstage with Renee Paquette interrupted by Max Caster, and within this moment, Max Caster's walking around and saying that he's been waiting for a long time, and he's waiting for his time, and then kind of brings up the thing that happened with Christopher Daniels, and Page, essentially retiring him. Hangman chases after Max Caster, which we pay off a little bit later on. In the meantime, we get the Hounds of Hell, so we get the presentation, once again, the new presentation of Brody King and Buddy Matthews, who look like absolute stars together, and I hope that down the line, we'll get a tag team match against the Hurt Syndicate, perhaps win those titles. I want big and great things for both of these guys. We will see Buddy Matthews take on Kazuchika Okada for the Continental Championship at Grand Slam Australia, which should be a hell of a showcase. I don't expect Buddy Matthews to win. It would be awesome if he does. Would be totally unforeseen. I would love it for him. These guys look every bit like a stud tag team. And they're opposed by Takeshita and Fletcher, who honestly, it was like one of those things where I'm like, you can't have those guys lose. And at the same time, can you really have the Hounds of Hell lose? It's almost like a no-win proposition booking-wise. But Hounds of Hell lose. They looked great in doing so. But I need to see these guys get wins, which is what I'm saying. Buddy Matthews picking up a win against Okada, winning that title in Australia in front of the home crowd would be awesome. We'll see what happens. We eventually get to Samoa Joe and Hook backstage. They go to look for Christian. They don't find Christian Cage. They instead find Nick Wayne and Kip Sabian. They beat the hell out of both of them. I love when Samoa Joe shows up with a Hawaiian shirt buttoned up to the top, and that ends up being the thing that he destroys, ends, obliterates humanity with. Great moment. Christian Cage kind of pokes his head in, sees what happens, bails with Mama Wayne, eventually comes back in after those guys are gone. Interesting stuff. Now, MJF makes his way out to the ring, and when he does, he eventually gets interrupted by Max Caster, who's still running from Hangman Page. Hangman Page gets in the ring, faces off with MJF yet again. We are once again planting the seeds of what is going to be a hell of a program between those two. He goes back in the crowd after Max Caster, but then in the midst of MJF cutting a promo, he gets interrupted by Dustin Rhodes, and Dustin Rhodes puts on a hell of a masterclass on the mic. Dustin Rhodes gets Max in the corner and just unloads on him about how MJF goes after people's wives and after people's substance abuse issues and their alcohol issues, and mentions that he happens to be one of those people himself and that he's been to hell and that Max isn't the devil. Woo, woo. So you get this like really great face-off between these two, and in a sense, you're getting that Grizzly Vet versus MJF, but it feels more plausible, and it doesn't feel as out of place as it did when it was MJF and Jeff Jarrett. This has a different feel to it, and it could be because Dustin Rhodes moves around better, looks like he's far less removed from the game than Jeff Jarrett does. There's a believability, there's a grizzle in that voice, there's gravel, there's bass there. Like there's something about Dustin Rhodes physically that makes you believe he's a more credible threat to MJF. And MJF crosses the line because not only does he mention the fact that Dustin Rhodes had these drug issues in the past, but then he says, it took 37 years for you to get out of your daddy's shadow, and now that you finally have, you're in the shadow of your little baby brother, and he gets decked. And so you get the pull apart, you get them going after each other. That, to me, is actually very interesting. So Dustin Rhodes and MJF is not something that I knew I would need in 2025, but it's something that I'm actively interested in. Speaking of things I'm interested in, anything that Toni Storm does. And Toni Storm put on yet another masterclass. After the Collision promo a couple weeks ago, where she unveiled and revealed that she was, in fact, the same woman. She had never forgotten what happened. She was still timeless Toni Storm, and she played the role of her life, playing herself. Toni Storm shows up, and what does Toni Storm do? She plays Mariah May. She plays the glamour Mariah May. I mean, the presentation is spot on. The outfit is spot on. The match, the way that it's wrestled, is spot on. Mariah May's on commentary. She's absolutely beside herself. The indignity of Toni Storm acting or trying to be Mariah May. Mariah May even says, like, how did she get that outfit to fit? How much did they have to alter it to make her fit in it? Woof. Also, when Tony Schiavone brings up the fact that Mariah May had done this with Toni Storm in the past, she said, yeah, well, she gave me those clothes and they fit me. I was like, oh my God. Whoa. Oh. Anyway, Toni Storm wins this match against Queen Aminata, a good match. I like Queen Aminata. We'll see eventually where she goes on the card, but a good match, the lone women's match on the card, but very good. And we are once again setting up well for Toni Storm and Mariah May another time. This told a good story. This progressed the plot, and it very clearly got into Mariah May's head, which then takes us to the New York Minute. We get the Learning Tree. Learning Tree does their whole thing. But Powerhouse Hobbs shows up, which he promised a week ago that he would, and Powerhouse Hobbs gets into it with the Learning Tree, with Big Bill, with Brian Keith. The Outrunners come out to help even the odds. Big Bill and Powerhouse Hobbs is something I can get behind. Let's build a few months out of this. I like both of those guys. I think both of those guys have actual star potential. They both could theoretically compete for a secondary title in this company. I would love to see these guys get actual room to breathe and get weekly episodic TV time, especially on Dynamite, to flesh this thing out. So I love that, which leads us to the main event, Ricochet and Swerve, which ended up being a fantastic match. There are disgusting bumps in this match, including a power bomb from Swerve to Ricochet on the guardrail, smacked flat back on the guardrail. Good God, this match is one that I can't do justice by giving you the blow-by-blow of what happened in the match. It's something you have to go and you have to watch. And it's arguably the best match that Ricochet has had since he's been in AEW. That should come as no surprise that he was across the ring from Swerve Strickland, who remains one of, if not the best wrestler in AEW from a bell-to-bell perspective. A fantastic match. And what ultimately ends up happening is you get Swerve trying to land the Swerve Stomp, and Ricochet is in a defensive position and essentially gives a low blow to Swerve, and then he hits the spear gun, and he wins the match. Not only does he win it, he steals the embassy jacket, the embassy coat that Swerve wears to a lot of big matches that has significant meaning to Prince Nana, which they highlighted at the beginning of the match during the entrances, and they highlighted again on the way out. But this Ricochet Swerve thing, there's something special there. And so, like, if you go segment by segment, this Dynamite was arguably the best one they've had, not only in 2025, I could say in months. From beginning to end, it felt like old AEW, but like in a good way, in the best way possible. You have story progression, you had great matchups in the ring, you had some decent backstage work, you had good work on the mic in the ring. MJF felt like MJF for honestly the first time, maybe the entire calendar year. There was a lot of good to build off with this episode.